in a book review on Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. This is a great book for anyone interested in politics or social change of any kind. Saul Alinsky was known for his work in Chicago as a pro-union guy. He did a lot of things for minority groups, and he can be a ruthless man, the kinds of things that he did. But his real goals were defending and supporting the little guy. And he took on anybody. The bigger the better. Why social activism fails. He might even, if he was alive, he might have even said this about the Wall Street movement, the Occupy Wall Street movement. People try to get to, he has a metaphor of like a play, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. People try to rush to Act 3. For there to be a revolution, you have to have a reformation. To assume that a political revolution can survive without the supporting base of a popular reformation is to ask for the impossible in politics. That perennial question, does the end justify the means, is as meaningless as it stands. The real and only question regarding the ethics of means and ends is, and has always been, does this particular end justify this particular means? But this is how he sees it. If you have an end that you need to do, there's something's going on. Let's say there's racism going on. There's a slavery going on. There's oppression going on in some way. The oppression must end. Slavery must end. There's your end, right? There's your purpose. There's your goal. He sees that as the highest consideration, the most important consideration. Slavery must end. How you do it, then it must be done. If your means to do it are not very nice, if they're violent, if people will die, he says that's okay, because the ends, the goal is more important. We have to end slavery. If we have to break some eggs to make an omelet, then we will. That kind of thing. He does say that he would rather use, like he doesn't want to use a violent means. He's not for using the most violent means, but he equally says that he is not going to back out from the goal. Figure out the nicest means to get there, and do it. You can only be judged if you had a choice of means. If you had a choice of means and you picked a more violent means, then you can be judged. Like, here's a great example: police brutality, right, or so-called police brutality. They could have done something else. They could have used non-lethal means to diffuse a situation or whatever. If you are backed against the wall and you don't have a choice, then ethics is out. That's what he says. If you only have one means at your disposal to get something done, and that something done is important, maybe saving your life, he says that ethics is not a consideration if you didn't have a choice. And I would certainly agree with that. Without choice, there is no morality. There is no ethics. So this is on page 51. He talks about power. And power is a very interesting concept. It's talked a lot about in sociology, what power is. He defines power as the ability to act. So if you're chained in the basement somewhere, you have no power. If you can't vote, you have no political power. He also then says, he ridicules the old adage from Lord Acton, which is that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But he says that the quote is wrong, that the real quote is that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Power tends to corrupt. That, he says, is the most important point, the tend. He says that the corruption of power is not in power, but in ourselves. It's an interesting argument, because that's the same argument that people use for gun rights people. They say that the guns don't kill people, that people kill people. So it's not. So for Alinsky, power is not a problem. It's the people using the power. Another point on power, this is on page 52. It is impossible to conceive of a world devoid of power. The only choice of concepts is between organized and unorganized power. Mankind has progressed only through learning how to develop and organize instruments of power in order to achieve order, security, morality, and civilized life itself. On page 61, he defends the word ego, which is quite interesting because most people think ego is bad. Ego is a positive conviction and belief in one's ability. This is actually very much the same as what Ayn Rand would say, that ego is self-esteem. That ego means that you have a presence, that you have a self-assertiveness, that you uphold your rights and dignity, that you exist, that you should be respected, that you have virtues. That is the same thing as ego for Alinsky. The context is what he's talking about here is organizers. He says that organizers need to have ego, they need to have presence. But I imagine he's also saying that for all people, that all people should not feel oppressed. They should feel that they have human dignity and they should stand for it. And so if they're being oppressed, they need to rally and make a change. Power is the reason for being of organizations. Every organization is based on some power base, he says. But certainly I think this is true for public institutions. Unions, for example, anything with exclusivity. So he says, rule number 2, never go outside the experience of your people. Rule number 3, whenever possible, go outside the experience of the enemy. So very interesting. You want to make sure that your supporters know what they're doing, are not going to be blindsided. But your enemy, you want to blindside. You want to do things that they do not think are possible, they can't deal with, they don't have the, especially companies and institutions that have bureaucratic structures, which means that they have to follow rules. Make them follow them. If you make them follow them, you can control them because you know what they're going to do. But you are not bound by laws and policies, and therefore you can always defeat them. You can always get around them. You can do whatever you like you can predict their actions. You can do something, know what they're going to do in response because their hands are tied, and there's only one thing they can do, and then you're ready for that. You can always destroy them that way because they must follow rules, but you don't. He says that ridicule is man's most potent weapon. If you ridicule something, if you make it funny, if you can destroy anything. You can destroy any value if you make a joke about it. Here's another great rule. This is the 12th rule. The price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. Very important. That's across the board. If you, even in academics, if you criticize something, you must provide an alternative, or people will just resort back to their default. Okay, this is rule 13, and this is probably one of his great principles. He says, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Pick a target. He says that the target should never be something abstract. Don't pick society as a target. Don't pick power. Don't pick the upper classes, the rich. Don't pick even an organization like evil Microsoft or something like that, evil Nike or whatever. Pick a person. Don't even pick your government. Don't even pick the federal government, the Republicans, the Democrats. Don't pick, or the municipal government. Pick a person. If you have a problem with the mayor of a city, which he talks about in here, pick the mayor. Pick the person. And ridicule and trash him, destroy him, make him out to be the devil. The next point is freezing it. What that means is that often what happens in corporations is that they will pass the buck and they will say, well, it wasn't my fault, this is what happened, and I told this committee this, and the committee decided something else, and there's all this crap going on, right? All this changing of hands. And Alinsky actually says that that's often actually what happens, but forget it. Don't bother with that. freeze it on a person. By personalization, I've already kind of talked about that. He means to make it a person. Essentially, don't make it something abstract. And then polarize it again is to make it out to be the devil. So you have a problem with the mayor. He's the devil. He's bad. He's horrible. Learn about everything you can about him. Make fun of his wife. Make everything. You just destroy him, that person. Make him out to be a dictator and corrupt and just anything you can. Smear the guy. And make your plight, your struggle to be righteous. He says on page 136 that you should goad your enemy so he does things, make him act, and that what really matters is his action and your reaction. And of course, he says that the best tactic, he says that you can threaten him, you can insult him, but the real good stuff, the real tactic is you should laugh at him, ridicule him, because that, if you insult him, if you threaten him, he can kind of claim that you're being a bully, so he can defend you on that. If you insult him, or you spread lies about him, he can provide evidence that you're lying, or just being insulting. But if you laugh and ridicule at him, the only reaction, if he reacts at all, which would be which he shouldn't do, but they usually do, the only reaction to being ridiculed and being laughed at is an irrational anger. And there is when usually in irrational anger, people say what they shouldn't say, and there you can get them more. He says that power is never static. You either grow or die. And he calls it a power cannibalism of the haves. And it's actually really interesting, because he actually did this too. He says that corporations are greedy bastards, right? And he says that you can easily exploit this fact by pitting a corporation against itself. You can, there's a great quote in here. He says that he could easily get a rich man to give him money on Friday that would make him rich on Sunday, but would kill him Monday. He says that rich people will do that deal. Corporations will do that deal too. He says that you can get a corporation to support you if that corporation can, if whatever efforts you're going to do, let's say you have a strike or something like that, or some kind of protest, if you can lock up another corporation, and therefore that the corporation that supported you can profit over that because you've damaged their competitor. He says that you can do that all day, that corporations will take it and they'll love it, even if it means that you're more powerful and then you can destroy them later. They don't care about that. You can easily pit people against each other, and he calls that power cannibalism. He says that going to jail could be a good thing. This is on page 156. The trouble with a long jail sentence is that A revolutionary is removed from action for such an extended period of time that he loses touch, and B, if you are gone long enough, everybody forgets you. Life goes on, new issues arise, and new leaders appear. However, a periodic removal from circulation by being jailed is an essential element in the development of the revolutionary. Jail can centralize your thoughts and allow you to write. And a lot of people, I think, do that when they're in jail. People who try to evoke change, is that they'll write a book. You're in jail, so you're on people's minds if it's a short term. And you can do the double benefit, not only of the being in people's minds, but also working on writing and working on the next steps. So he sees that as can be a benefit. So that was my review of Saul Alinsky's. I took out, I thought, the best pieces of his strategies and advice for social radicals. This is a great book to go through, and I hope the review is helpful.